So this week's, most of this week is about the endocrine system, which is another integrative system, which means it controls other systems, much like the nervous system does. So it's a physiology heavy submodule and a very minority histology part, which is what I'm giving now. So a throwback to embryology. Okay, so where things come from, you know that the nervous system comes from the ectoderm, same as your skin, and the endocrine system will come somewhere else other than the ectoderm. But it all starts with cells, as you can see here. So learning outcomes for this less than 1 hour lecture would be to recognize. So mostly visual recognition, visual pattern recognition of what an endocrine tissue looks like. There will be differences in the way they look in terms of the color, the arrangement of cells. But if you understand the basics behind it, the next time you see a picture of an endocrine organ, you'll know that it is an endocrine organ. So we'll be going to something that Dr. Seng mentioned in this lecture in neuroanatomy, pituitary and pineal glands, and then something you may have encountered in head and neck, the thyroid and the parathyroid glands. And soon in OS 206, you get to know the adrenals. So since this will be repeated over and over by the physiologist, just showing this screen right now, just to mention that the distinction of these particular tissues are the absence of a physical outlet for those chemicals that they secrete, which are hormones. Because they do not pass through a duct, they go straight into the bloodstream, and that defines it as a hormone. A hormone not only is released into the bloodstream directly, but it also does something very important, which is to regulate something else, which is everything else that your body does. Now, even the secretion of these hormones by those endocrine glands will also have to be directed by a controller organ located in the brain, which are your hypothalamus and the pituitary glands. So going back to cytology, if you remember the preparation of the slides, it gives you an idea of what that tissue used to do in life. So depending on what hormone is being synthesized, it can either be based from a cholesterol base or it's a protein based kind of hormone. It will now shape the way the endoplasmic reticulum appears in the cell. Now, because they are actively doing something, they need to have a lot of code, DNA code for that. So they have to have prominent nuclei. Next, production of hormones requires energy. So energy means you need the powerhouse of the cells, which are your mitochondria. And as mentioned earlier, depending on what hormone is eventually produced, there will be a majority or a predominance of a smooth endoplasmic reticulum if you're producing a hormone derived from fat over here. And then what the implications for this means when the ethanol takes away the fat from the cells and the other things that we do to dissolve all the fat away from the cells, it clears out the cytoplasm. So under the microscope, they would appear as lighter or clearer, but not exactly clear because you have other organelles floating around inside, such as the Golgi apparatus and the vesicles that pinch off the membranes of those Golgi apparatuses. Now, under the electron microscope, you'll get a more distinct appearance for endocrine tissue because they have characteristic black holes or black circles inside, which are the granules, which appear as dark under the EM because they are electron dense. So these are the granules containing the hormones that will be released via vacuoles. So as mentioned, the diencephalon, which contains your hypothalamus, will control the secretion, much like what the basal ganglia does. There's a system of checks and balances to make sure your hormones are always at an optimum level in your bloodstream, such as something that you need almost every day, which is your thyroid hormones. So your cells need this to continue their growth for their basic bodily functions. So too much of that, unless checked by the hypothalamus, will lead to a condition known as hyperthyroidism. But if the thyroid hormone is not producing enough hormones and this is not picked up by the hypothalamus, then you're in a hypothyroid state. So when you have hypothyroid state, you need to check if the problem is with the thyroid or is it because of something being released or not being released here in the hypothalamus and pituitary glands. Next, there in your abdomen will be your adrenal glands, which are monitoring your state of hydration. So how much water and salt you have at any point in time, as well as your need for energy. Because when you're under a lot of stress, the adrenal glands will produce a stress hormone as well, based on your needs. Hence, the need must be determined first and monitored by the bloodstream, by your neurons here inside your uh, hypothalamus. More on that later. For the ladies, every month there is a signal uh, to make your bodies prepared for developing a child. So you need those ovarian cysts to mature and become viable eggs to be fertilized. And this happens every month unless nothing happens. You you build a nest inside here, the uterus, and allow the uterine lining to thicken in anticipation of an implantation of a fertilized egg. But in case nothing happens, it must be dismantled every month, leading to menses or your menstruation. Of course, all of these are being monitored and regulated by your pituitary gland. So imagine if nothing starts here, if the engine doesn't start here, nothing happens down here. So when the women come in for a fertility checkup, we also have to look out, is the problem here inside the brain or is it really just here in the ovaries? And then something more complex, which you'll understand better in internal medicine next year, also has to do with what I mentioned earlier with the adrenals. They're always monitoring the state of hydration of your body. So in layman's terms, kung kulang. So if your blood vessels are collapsing because there's not enough fluid inside, then the last ditch effort is to tighten your belts because there's not enough fluid running around. So you have vasoconstriction. And for this to happen, it must be also picked up. Hence, the importance of the endocrine organs being very richly supplied by blood so it can monitor the levels of all these things on the screen at any point in time. And the brain must pick that up and monitor it. Your hypothalamus must monitor it. Naturally, if you're dehydrated, you feel thirst. So the thirst is detected here inside the hypothalamus and hence the urge to drink water. Okay. So these are just nutshells. I'm sure the physiologist can explain it much better. Now back to histology. So we're dealing here with modified epithelial cells, meaning if they are epithelial cells, it means they must be lining something hollow, but they do not secrete into that hollowness over here. So they may be simple epithelium or they may be stacked like this or stratified epithelium. These are what endocrine tissue would look like until you see that they must be coupled with something else to be called endocrine tissue. So they are actually derived from glands which used to have ducts. No, they used to have ducts, but they lost it. So here are the different ducts that you were introduced to in histology earlier during the semester, the first semester. What happens with endocrine tissue is you pinch off the opening. So it used to have a duct, but the duct has been disconnected. So where else would those chemicals have to go except through the bloodstream? So they are modified epithelial cells as such, but they have no opening to send out their chemicals. So they are not exocrine, they are endocrine. So this is seen here in the way that the pancreas develops. So of all these, so this is a schematic. These are the acini of the pancreas, which you have seen earlier during the semester, but did not know what they actually did. So this is how it forms. So you actually have epithelial cells. Some will branch off and form ducts, but some will no longer create ducts. Hence the need for another outlet for it to send out its products, which is the bloodstream. Hence, no ducts means the exit point must be into the bloodstream via capillaries. So a common feature of all endocrine tissue is that they have a lot of capillaries, and they form plexuses where small venules, small veins, and small arteries uh, will always interact such that there will never be ischemia in these kinds of organs. Only a major event would cause ischemia or lack of blood flow to these organs here. But it does happen. Now, the third feature, which is best seen under the electron microscope, are the evidence of producing a hormone inside a vesicle which goes into the bloodstream. So the presence of granules, it suggests that it secretes something. So the caveat here is it's not seen in all endocrine tissue, not because it never existed, but because it may have been already released at that point in time. So this is the EM, this is the diagram of a granule. So a lot of things inside, but the gist is it is a container for a hormone inside. As you can see, a lot of those receptors may look or may not look familiar, which means that these vesicles are not just floating bags of random hormones. So they have targets here, as you can see.